Thanks. My name is Nathan. I'm an alcoholic. And Bob, who spoke a little while ago, when I said I was coming up here to get meeting schedules, this event that she was just alluding to, he said, and I thought he was joking, careful, they're going to trick you into being a speaker. They're going to trick you into service. So, you know, and I thought he was kidding. And he was not. And I remember after he said that, I said, oh, well, I am immune to peer pressure. It's not going to be a thing. It's not going to be a problem. And no. She said, would you like to be a speaker? I was like, oh, okay. You know, I fell for it immediately. So anyway, my sobriety birthday is July 2nd of 2010. I have a sponsor. My home group is the Waterfront Group. So I'm coming up on 15 years in July, and I got sober pretty young. I'm 38. I got sober when I was 23 years old, and when I say that, a lot of people tell me that oh wow, I wish I got sober that young. Oh man, imagine what my life would have been like if I got sober at 23. And so I try not to take it for granted that I could have dug much further down than I did. But it got pretty dark, as you'll hear. So I just want to say that I think, like a lot of people, I can't blame my addiction on my family or my upbringing. It was not exactly white picket fence. I mean, there's a lot of alcoholism and drug addiction in my family, but compared to other stuff that I've heard in the rooms, I had it pretty easy. You know, white, suburban, privileged upbringing. Never, went to bed hungry. Never, if I wanted something, most of the time I could have it. I felt safe and loved, and my father went to my baseball game. I basically tried drugs and alcohol at age 13 because I was imitating my older brother, whom I worshipped, who was going through a phase. And so I said, I'm going to be a bad kid too. And the first time that I tried alcohol, I fell in love immediately. It was like I had been carrying a weight that I didn't know was there. And then, oh, this is what it's about, And so I committed consciously in my mind at that point that this is what I was about. This is what I do now. And all my pocket money and all my free time went to drinking and using and finding the ways and the money to do so more. And my resources at that time were pretty limited because I was only 13, but turned 15, got a part-time job, had a little money in my pocket. Things got worse. Graduated high school, went away to college at Wazoo, had a little more freedom, had a little more money in my pocket. Things got worse. Started, going hard every day and started getting in trouble at school, got arrested once, nothing serious. I avoided most legal entanglements, despite the fact that I drove drunk basically every day for years, committed felonies every single day. I only once spent the night in the drunk tank, just lucky, I guess. And eventually, in my freshman year of college, my friends, who are mostly normies, after one particularly bad binge of mine, they had a little mini intervention. They told me that I was worried, that I was wasting my potential, that I was going to flunk out of school. They hated to see me hurting myself like that and being dishonest and treating people badly. And to me, that was a clear sign that I needed to find some new friends because they didn't get it. They didn't, there was no question. What? Stop drinking every day? What are you talking about? No. So I found new people who wanted to go hard every day, and we did. And I flunked out of school, and I'll spare you the details. It got dark. It got bad. My family didn't want me. Like I said, I flunked out of school. I burned all the relationships. I subsisted on petty crime. I was sleeping in my car. I hated myself, and I wanted to die. And each night I would put my head on the pillow saying that tomorrow would be different. Not necessarily that I would stop drinking. Sometimes I said that. But then each day that I woke up, it just didn't seem like a good day. It didn't seem easy enough to stop drinking right now. So I'll wait for it to be easy to stop drinking and using. And I was like that with all the things that I really needed to do in my life. It didn't seem like the right time to quit drinking. It wasn't convenient enough. That's one of the important lessons that I had to learn in the rooms is how to do the hard thing. Do the thing that seems scary or the thing that I don't fully understand. But more on that later. I think that when I went to the rooms for the first time, I was still in Pullman, go Cougs, and I was the only person under the age of like 45 or 50 in the rooms there, and I found it very easy to draw a line between myself and everyone else there to say, yeah, well, this is why I don't fit in. this is why these people are not my community. It's because I'm younger than them. I had other reasons, which we'll discuss, but from the moment I walked in, I was setting myself apart. I was alone in a crowd, like we say. There was no denying that I was addicted to drugs and alcohol. That had been obvious for years. But my disease was looking for any wedge that it could drive between me and the only people that could help me. But I kept coming back basically for two reasons. One, because I was welcomed, and it was nice to be invited places. I was, like the book says, an unwelcome hanger-on everywhere that I went. The dope man wanted my money and wanted me gone. The girlfriend had long since left. Nobody was ever happy to see me. I go into the grocery store. They know I'm there to shoplift. It was nice to be in a room of people who were genuinely happy to see me. I couldn't imagine why they were, but they were. So that was the first reason. And the second reason was that when I heard the people in the room share their stories and talked about the ways that they had drank and used and felt and suffered, I heard myself in their stories, despite the fact that on the surface, I felt like I didn't have anything in common with them. I was too young. I was too poor. They were seemingly very, very religious, upright people, and I don't believe in God, so I can't fit in here. But I think there's something magical, if you like, about our stories. Right? Our stories have a self-authenticating quality. When I hear an alcoholic who I don't know from Adam share their story in the rooms, something fits. I know that you get it. I know that you felt the way that I felt. And I think that if it weren't for that, this fellowship couldn't have possibly survived. It's the absolute bedrock. And I love going to meetings in other cities when I travel because, it's different, but it's the same. I can hear I can hear the same message in a different voice with different details and be reminded that I'm a member of this community. This community is the most important part of my life and the biggest thing that I've got going on. And I say that happily. There was the first few years I was, like I said, I was still quite young. I got sober at 23. I grew into a man in these rooms. So at the same time as I was learning, about a spiritual experience and about service to other people, I was just learning basically how to function as an adult. They say that you're stuck at the emotional age that you were at when you started using. So for me, that was 13. I had a lot to learn. And it was painful and it was scary, but I was walking in the footsteps of people who had been through it before, who had been through worse, and that's why I stuck around. I think that another important lesson that I had to learn in the rooms is that I've got a disease, which is it's a disease of extremes and hyperbole, right? Like, I'm the best, I'm the worst. This is the best day of my life. This is the worst day of my life. This is a tragedy, or I'm invincible. I think that a piece of humble pie that I had to swallow is just how ordinary I really am. My alcoholism is not particularly interesting. My story's not particularly interesting. It doesn't really matter. But it's like we say, I'm not much, but I'm all I think about. I had to be the best or the worst. Everything had to be perfect or dog shit. That was just the way that I lived. And that black and white thinking is something that I really had to lose in order to fully realize the gifts that the program offers. It was, I struggled early on with a number of these barriers that I was talking about. I at first, when I was still in Eastern Washington, I was too young. Obviously that's the wedge I can draw. And I again reject steps 2, 3, 6, 7, 11. I don't believe in God. I'm not going to pray. Forget it. And that was my disease holding on just with a little thread. That's right. You're different. It's okay. You don't have to do the whole thing. And the book says half measures avail us nothing. And I think that that's true in one sense, and it's not true in another sense. It's true in the sense that the spiritual experience, the fullness of what 12-step recovery offers, you cannot get it through half measures. So that's true. But I can't say that half measures availed me nothing, because the first few years of my recovery were some serious half measures, and I learned very valuable lessons about why you shouldn't do that. I suffered and mistreated people and earned amends that I needed to make. And I had to run face first into all the mistakes that all the progenitors in AA have made before me. You know, it would be nice if I could, for once, learn a life lesson in recovery just because someone says, hey, watch out. There's a pit right there. Don't fall into it. And instead of falling in and being like, oh, okay, I could just listen. But that's not my story. I don't recommend that. It's nice to just listen to advice and follow it. But for me, like I said, I had to take a few lumps to really learn these things. And maybe that's because I got sober young. I don't know. Maybe I'm just stupid. But yeah, so I want to talk about these barriers that I built up and how I got rid of them, and how I committed to this, and how I embraced this community, and how I embraced this lifestyle despite the many issues that I had with the book and with the small T traditions that we have here in the way that we carry ourselves. Similar to what Michael was talking about, they also did the Lord's Prayer at the first meeting that I went to, and I had a really serious problem with that. Kept me out for a little while. Again, that wasn't their fault. That was me, of course, right? That was me saying, if I hadn't found that as the excuse to not come back, I probably would have just come up with something. I didn't like her hat. I'm out of here. You know what I mean? But that was the excuse that I found that day. And despite the fact that I have never at any point begun believing in a supernatural higher power, have I ever embraced the idea that recovery is something that is done to me from outside instead of a thing that I do as part of this community. I have found it. I have found the spiritual experience that it talks about. It was of the educational variety, like the second appendix says. But what I needed to get out of the way was, I was given some bad advice early on. When I first went into treatment and I said I was an atheist, the treatment center lady said, you should read We Agnostics. So I read We Agnostics, and it did not help at all. I felt, again, I recognize this is my own deficiency, but the point is, the thesis statement of We Agnostics is, oh, you don't believe in God? Oh, you're an agnostic? You're an atheist? Well, stop it. That felt smug, and it felt not helpful. And despite the fact that I know that chapter has literally saved the lives of millions of people, for me, it wasn't what I needed to hear at that time. And like I said, this book saved my life and the lives of millions of other people. And I teach it, and I respect it, and it's very precious to me. But that doesn't mean I don't got problems with it. It doesn't mean that I don't struggle with some of the things that it says. And that was one of the big barriers that I had to get over. Not the book, not the God stuff. That wasn't the barrier. The barrier was my own ego. I was pole vaulting mouse turds. The problem is that I said to myself, it was that same problem of extremes, hyperbole. If I can't 100% understand and conceive of every single detail of the program and how it works, then it's no good, and I'm gone and I'm drinking. Instead of calm down, take a breath. You don't understand a concept of God? Okay, get in line. Nobody does. Sit down, drink the coffee, and give yourself a break. That the lesson that I had to learn was to stop being so black and white. Stop trying desperately to set myself apart in any way, and embrace the fact that I am a garden variety alcoholic with all the attendant consequences. I can't take a drink or I'll die, or worse. It's that simple. And I can, whatever feelings I have when I hear someone share about their higher power, and I get all puffed up, and I have to show everybody how smart I am and how different and better I am because of how I have a different viewpoint. Take a breath. It's not that important. Everybody in the rooms has a different concept of a higher power. And I think if we're doing a good job of practicing the principle of open-mindedness, everybody should have an open mind that perhaps their concept of a higher power could change over time. And how exactly they do their spiritual practice can evolve. It has to. I can't get in a rut. We'll talk about ruts a little later, but that was the barrier. It was completely an inside job, just like everything else in this program. I needed to stop finding reasons to set myself apart or get offended or have my brain out the door while the meeting is going on. I just sit down and just listen and not feel like I had to completely internalize and understand and file every single thing that I heard or read in this program. I just needed to be here and try my best. And that took years and a lot of suffering for me to learn that lesson. A lot of pits fallen into, as I mentioned. But just like when I was using, just like when I woke up feeling withdrawal symptoms and said, today's not a good day. So, maybe it'll be easier tomorrow. The lesson that I had to learn is we don't just sit around waiting for it to be convenient to make our lives better. That's an excuse. That's our disease, right? We have to do the thing that's difficult. And there are certain aspects of the program that I took to right away. I love sharing. I found it easy to attend meetings. I love to talk. I think I do a pretty good job of speaking. So that part was easy. But I really struggled with feeling genuine compassion for newcomers, or caring about other people at all, and it's true, and a work in progress. And I found it also difficult to be completely thorough and honest on my fourth step. The first one that I did contained two really glaring omissions. As I was writing down my inventory, and I was including some heavy stuff on there, in just wriggling in the back of my mind with these two particular things that I had done that I had sworn that I would take to my grave. And so the first time that I read my fifth step to my sponsor, I left those things off. And as I was reading everything else on there, the only thing on my mind was those two things. And was I going to tell him? But I didn't. This is one of the half measures that taught me why I shouldn't do half measures. And the fact that I had been dishonest on my fourth step haunted me for another year as I went around the steps again and came back around to the fourth step again. It was the only thing on my mind as the fourth step was assigned to me, as I sat down to write it. And as I was being assigned the fourth step by my sponsor, I just couldn't take it anymore, and I blurted them out. I did this, I did that. I don't know what I thought was going to happen. I don't know if he thought that he was going to attack me, kick me out. He was completely uninterested. In fact, my sponsor's only reaction to me saying that was he was slightly annoyed because I had interrupted him. In order to say he's like, me too, man. Let's read. I had, like I said, extremes and hyperbole. My sins were the worst sins. My shame was the greatest shame. And if you felt how I felt, then you would do half measures too. And because I am unlovable and because I am not worth saving, that's why it's okay for me to leave this stuff off. That was the lie that I told myself. And that was the last barrier that had to fall. And then ultimately, I wish I could tell you that I never did another half measure, but that's not true at all. My recovery has seasons. And I do not recommend this for anyone, but it's just like a sine wave, right? I'm having a hard time, so I'm going to meetings every day, and I'm sponsoring a ton of guys, and I'm doing my best, and I'm doing nightly inventories, and things get better. But things get better, and now things are good. So that means I don't need to go to these meetings, right? Gradually I taper off. Gradually I take my will back. Gradually I'm engaging in old behaviors. And then things are bad again, and oh my goodness, I gotta get back in the rooms. And like I said, it would be better to just stay. It would, and that's the final thing that I want to touch on is this idea of prophylaxis of recovery. What we really do here, what we really offer is not only a community, which is very important, a spiritual program of action, which helps heal our minds, but the opportunity to learn from others' experience and gird ourselves up against the potential slip, like it says in the book. There's it's about, there's a part, my favorite line in the whole book is, we are unable at certain times to call into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. We are without defense against the first strike. That qualifier at certain times is always with me, because against all odds, despite the fact that wanting to drink and use was my whole personality for years, I have not seriously considered picking up a drink or a drug in over a decade. I find it easy, like the book says, to not pick up a drink. That's not the point anymore. My struggle today is against myself and my disease and my character defects. I have done the impossible. I am through this program. The impossible has been accomplished. I no longer want to drink. It's a miracle. But now I guess the way I want to say is, I got to decide first instead of falling into those pits. I need to. It's like the sex ideal on the fourth step. I want to decide what kind of sane and sound ideal I want for my future life. I need to decide what kind of relationships I would like to have, what kind of life I would like to have. And that applies to far more than just that portion of the inventory. But what the program gives me is a community and a way to build myself up, because at certain times, despite ample evidence to the contrary, a drink is going to sound like a good idea. Maybe a personal tragedy occurs. Maybe I lose a job. Maybe nothing happens at all. Maybe I'm just uncomfortable in my own skin that day. Maybe I'm just bored. Who knows? But for all of us, that day is coming. And when one passes, another one is on the way. So what we really do here is surround ourselves with a community, and we become accountable to that community and to our sponsors, so that in the event that we begin to slip into old behaviors, somebody's there to say, well, you missed your hunger. Where were you? You're acting strangely. You seem upset. Do you want to talk about it? You know, because up here is a dangerous place to be. I know all my best moves. We can't recover on our own. That's the point. We have to look out for each other. For me to try to defeat my own character defects on my own resources was like me waking up and deciding not to drink that day. It's like playing chess against myself. There is no point. The whole thing is senseless. I can always find a reason why today is an exception, or why this person had it coming. You know, I've got to have you. You know, and so that's what I mean when I say at certain times. That's the crucial part. I find it's not hard for me to not use today. It probably won't be hard for me to not use tomorrow. But someday a drink is going to sound like a good idea. And where will I be on that day? Hopefully, I'll have gone to a meeting that day. Hopefully, I'll be in contact with various people in recovery so that I know where to turn. Because left to myself, the insidious insanity returns. I will concoct an insanely trivial excuse for taking the first drink, and then it won't matter anymore. You know, then it'll be too late. So deciding first is I think the best lesson that I've learned, and the most important thing that I'm not at all perfect at. I've got to not wait until there's a crisis. You know, I lived crisis to crisis for years, and I thrived in it in some ways. In many ways, I'm just a profoundly lazy person. And when I was using and I was, I didn't have a place to sleep, everything was an emergency. You know, I've got to come up with $60 or this guy is going to beat my ass, right? The cops are coming after me and I need to hide. You know, that's a terrible way to live, and it's incredibly stressful and unhealthy, but it's simple. You know, run from the cops, steal the money, and pay off the drug dealer. You know what I mean? Like, everything was clear. And although it was uncomfortable and self-harming, I never had to make a decision. I never had to make a moral decision. I had to get money, to get drugs and alcohol, and deal with the consequences of that repeat. Despite the fact that it was absolute misery, there was a certain amount of comfort that I found in that simplicity in a sick way. Now I have to learn how to live free, with money in my pocket, with the freedom to do whatever the hell I want. You know, in many ways, if I'm full of my character defects, I'm more dangerous today than I was back then, because I have so much more to lose, because people actually count on me now. So if I let them down, there are consequences. I have a lot more to lose. This program has given me absolutely everything in my whole life. Not to mention, obviously, my life itself, dignity, my purpose in my life, my physical health. I met my wife in the rooms. Everything of value in my life was given to me because I got sober, and I got sober because of you people. Despite the fact that I felt like I had nothing in common with them, the people that I met early on, despite the fact that in every room that I come in here, you know, it's a murderer's row of weirdos, you know, and I'm just one of them. I'm just another ordinary alcoholic like the rest of you. And at first, that hurt me to think about, but now, God, it's so much easier being the most important person in the world. How stressful to be the most important person in the world, you know, with all the most important problems and all the worst, most grievous sins and shame. It's so much easier to just be a regular dude with regular problems, and to not view myself in those ridiculous terms. But that's the main thing. The big lesson I want to get back to is deciding first and acting later. Instead of being reactive to the last emergency that happened, oh my gosh, my power is going to get shut off. Oh my gosh, I gotta find money to pay off this guy. Now it's my problems are existential. What do I want to be? What do I want? What do I value? What kind of people would I like to have in my life? Those aren't simple questions, and there aren't simple answers to them. But I mean, these sorts of things, these sorts of Cadillac problems, that's what I think people mean when they say, beyond my wildest dreams. Getting sober gave me a life beyond my wildest dreams. I could not have imagined wondering what kind of plants I should plant in my garden this year. But that's the main thing I've been thinking about for the past week, and it's beautiful. I, yeah, man. I get to decide first, so that when that crisis comes, when the other shoe drops, and for some reason a drink sounds like a good idea, or some other, incorrect action seems like a good idea, I've already talked about that. I've already done an inventory on that. I've already decided first what kind of man I want to be, and what my life means, and who I want to have in it, and what I want to do. So that when a crisis or a difficult situation arises, I can just look at it and say, ruthlessly stick to the principles that I set down with the help of this program long before. I have in many times in my life stayed way past the expiration date at jobs and in relationships, just because I didn't want to be a failure. And now I think one of the greatest accomplishments that I have in recovery was breaking up with somebody. She didn't do anything wrong. She's a lovely person. I bear her no ill will at all. And every other relationship in my life had ended in absolute, mushroom cloud. But in this particular case, she didn't do anything wrong. She just wasn't the one. This just wasn't the thing. It just wasn't what I wanted. And so I had to end that relationship. And it seems like a mundane thing, but when you compare that to the other relationships, not just romantic, but any other relationship I had in my life, that was incredible. That was an incredible accomplishment because of the scared little boy that I was, and the scared little boy who didn't want to be a loser, who didn't want to lose things, who didn't want to be a failure. That was an important lesson for me to learn. The same thing happened with jobs. I've been saying for years that, I've lost 2 jobs unexpectedly in my life, and both times it was a catalyst for a major positive change in my life, but now it's 3. I was laid off from my job at the end of February, and it was scary, and there's definitely economic anxiety there, but it's given me a moment of clarity. I had a moment of clarity shortly after that where I realized I wanted to make a career change into something that I really care about, that I really value, instead of just worrying about money and paying my bills. And I feel emboldened. I feel powerful. I feel like my life has purpose. And all of this, absolutely everything of value in my life has come from the rooms of 12-step recovery and from AA. And I think it was told to me early on, and I think about it often, that I might be, some normie, some person may come along, they know that I'm sober, they ask me a question. I might be the only exposure to 12-step recovery they ever have. They're going to form their entire opinion of what this room is all about, these rooms and these people and this book is all about, based on a 3-minute conversation with me. That's a heavy responsibility. I don't want to sell it to people. I don't, it's attraction, not promotion. But I mean, I've been sober for a little while now, and a dozen times in my life, unexpectedly, I've gotten a phone call with someone saying, my brother or me or my mom is having a problem. What should I do? That's a heavy responsibility, and I take it seriously. This book says, having had a spiritual awakening is the result of these steps, we try to carry this message to addicts, alcoholics, and to practice principles in all our affairs. That's not extra credit. That's not a suggestion. When I was asked to chair this meeting, I said yes, not because of peer pressure, like I talked about at the beginning, but because it is my sacred responsibility to carry this message when I'm asked to. Because if another man hadn't been there for me early on, I would be dead. End of story. Or worse, still alive and still using. So I'm just about out of time, but it's been a real privilege to be here. It's a privilege to call myself a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I only hope that somebody hears this recording someday, and I'll just say to them that no matter what barriers you have put in the way, no matter what reasons your disease has given for why this fellowship isn't for you, I'd like to extend my personal invitation to join the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. We'd love to have you, and don't give up. Thanks so much.